So today we are going to talk about. We are going to talk about Judith Jarvis Thompson's paper, "A Defense of Abortion." And in this paper, basically, Thompson is trying to argue against the view that abortions are impermissible, they're morally wrong, in various kinds of cases. So generally, she wants to argue that just for kind of the minimal claim that sometimes it's morally permissible to perform an abortion, to have an abortion. And then she wants to say a little bit more than that about different kinds of cases in which it might be permissible to perform an abortion, sort of in response to worries with her initial argument that the extreme view, as we'll see if that is, that abortions are never permissible, that the extreme view is false, and then there's some responses that she'll come up against, and she'll kind of keep going and try to get more and more cases where it's permissible to have an abortion. But the important thing about her argument is kind of this methodology, this strategy that she uses, which was kind of new. At least it was kind of creative the way in which she went about this, and we'll kind of see what that is in this first portion here. But so the reading has been posted to Canvas, so look at the reading, read through it. It's kind of a fun reading. I mean, it's a serious topic, but she goes through a series of thought experiments that are kind of, at least kind of interesting and clever and fun to think about whether or not you end up agreeing with them. It's kind of a sort of philosophically fun, thought-provoking paper. So, all right. So, I should say, so we're only going to talk about this paper because we just don't have a lot of time. We didn't have class Monday, and so we just have to move on to other topics next week. But I also uploaded a paper from Don Marquis called "Why Abortion Is Immoral," and it's not necessarily like a direct response to Thomson, but it is an argument for the impermissibility, the wrongness of abortion, from Don Marquis that was pretty influential, and a lot of people thought that there was at least some helpful and sort of creative ways in which Marquis introduced certain kinds of worries about the future life of a fetus in particular, and what makes it wrong to kill in general, and therefore using that principle, what would make it wrong to kill an unborn human or fetus. If they are a human, if they are a person, that's another question that doesn't really get touched on, at least in this paper. So in any case, I uploaded the Marquis paper too, just so you can have a sort of contrasting view. This Thomson argues that abortion is sometimes permissible, and as you can see, a defense of abortion. And Marquis argues that abortion is never permissible. At least almost never. I guess not. I shouldn't say never. Most of the time, it's going to be impermissible, wrong. Okay, so you can look at that one as well if you want to see the other side. All right, so there's kind of a decent amount in here, so I'll kind of move through it and let's get going. So there's a lot of content in this paper. It's not a super long paper. It's just she does a lot of different things. So we'll start here with her strategy. Okay, so Thomson has this particular strategy. Thomson with no P, just so you know, if you write any papers or assessment papers or posts or anything on this. So her strategy is to grant the personhood of the fetus, meaning she's granting that a fetus is a person. Okay, and she wants to avoid those what's called metaphysical debates about when a person comes into existence, whether or not fetuses have the appropriate features to qualify as a human person, whether you need rationality or whether it's just sort of intrinsic features of the organism. If you think that for instance, an embryo and then eventually a fetus is an organism, or at what point it becomes an organism, and in particular a human organism. And then maybe even if it's a human organism, maybe you think being a person is different from being a human organism because you need special properties, like maybe even just consciousness or the minimal capacity for rationality or whatever. And those are tough debates to have when a human comes into existence. It's a very hard subject. And so Thomson wants to avoid having to think about that. So she's like, let's just pretend that the fetus is a person, right? And so the reason she does this is because before her paper, while she was writing, when she was thinking about this, a lot of times pro-lifers, people who were against abortion, that thought abortions were wrong, impermissible, often thought that if they could establish that the fetus was a person, then they've just won, right? That's it. Once you establish that the fetus has the property of being a person, has the right features so that we can ascribe personhood to it, you put the fetus in the category of being a person, then that's it. The debate's over, right? Since persons have a right to life, if the fetus is a person, the fetus would have a right to life, and then mothers do have a right to the body, but the right to life seems to outweigh or trump the right to the body. And so abortion, which is killing a fetus, would then violate the fetus's right to life. So once you get to, the argument kind of looks something like this. And remember to check the handout for information about arguments and what it takes for an argument to be good and so on. The argument would go, the fetus is a person from conception, and they try to argue for that, right? And they try to show why the embryo and even maybe what you might call the fertilized egg and early, especially early fetal development, early embryonic development, why you can show they would argue that the fetus is a person from either conception or from these very, very early stages, right? And so they would say the fetus is a person, and they would try to argue for that. All persons have a right to life, right? That is a right to not be killed unjustly without proper cause. You might think like self-defense might be proper cause, or a just war or something like that. But the fetus is a person. All persons have a right to life. The right to life trumps the right over someone's body. So if you have the choice between killing someone or cutting off another person's finger, and let's say these are the only options you have, you should cut off the person's finger, right? I mean, you're going to violate that person's right to their body, their bodily integrity, or just make it even easier, right? You can either kill someone or punch someone, right? Punching someone violates the right to their body. Killing someone violates their right to life, right? And so right to life seems like a more stringent right, more sort of powerful right than the right to your body. Even though the right to your body it's a powerful right, it's probably pretty stringent as well, but certainly not as stringent as the right to life. That's the idea anyways. And so if the fetus is a person, if all persons have a right to life, and the right to life trumps the right to the body, it follows that, therefore, abortion, killing a fetus, is wrong because it violates the fetus's right to life unjustly. Right, because typically the justifications seem to be, well, you're allowed to kill the fetus because it's the mother's body, it's her right, it's her choice, right? But if you think all of these things, then it seems to follow that abortion would be wrong. And so the pro-lifers spent a lot of time trying to defend. They took these to be pretty intuitive, and they try to defend this claim that the fetus is a person, right? So premise 1 is the crucial premise. Pro-lifers feel that they don't need to argue any further than this because 2 and 3 seem pretty clear. As you see here, premise 2 is just like what it is to be a person is to, at least in part, not maybe part of what it is to be a person, but part of what comes with being a person is that they're morally relevant, morally valuable entities. And the default is, unless you have really, really, really good reasons, you can't kill them, right? And similarly with 3, like I just said, given the choice, right, you should choose to lose your bodily freedom for 9 months over killing someone, killing a fully morally valuable human, right? Just life seems more valuable than the right to your body. Again, even though the right to your body, bodily integrity, is really important and really valuable. It's not saying that. It's just saying that it seems pretty clear that right to life is more valuable and would trump. If you had to choose between one and everything else was equal, life wins out over bodily rights. Okay, so this was kind of the strategy here. for pro-lifers. And so Thomson comes along and she says, well, look, personhood, I'm just going to do that, sorry. Personhood is kind of a messy issue, right? They get bogged down in these disputes about what a person is, when a person comes into existence, where on this continuum of development you get this first moment of being a person, right? And there's a video here that kind of gives a kind of helpful introductory style overview of these kinds of questions of what a person is. And then pro-lifers would argue that fetuses are persons, while pro-choicers would argue that they aren't, or that they're merely potential persons, or maybe even if they're persons, they lack certain other properties, qualities that persons need to get some special moral status, right? So maybe they would say like, well, they're like human organisms, but not moral persons yet, or something like that. But the debate was about this personhood stuff. And Thomson's like, this is really messy, you know, they would say like potential X's have less rights than X's, so the president can send troops into battle, but the potential president can't. Citizens can vote, but potential citizens can't, and so this would be a pro-choicer kind of thing. Either they're not persons or they're merely potential persons, and that lowers their rights. But Thomson basically says, let's get away from this. Let's get away from this argument about whether fetuses are persons. She's like, I'll just grant you, pro-lifer, that the fetus is a person. I don't want to have these messy debates. Let's just avoid those and just say, look, 1 and 2, fetus is a person. All persons have a right to life, not to be killed unjustly by default. She's like, I'll just give you those. I'll just assume that those are true. That's what Thomson says. Everyone's been fighting you here, and maybe fighting you here by saying, well, there's a difference between persons and potential persons, or persons and early stage persons in terms of their rights. She's like, forget it. I'll just grant you these two. And then we'll focus here. Even if the fetus is a person, and all persons have a right to life, does it follow that abortion is wrong? Well, only if this ends up being true. And that's where she's going to want to push back. So she grants, for the sake of argument, that fetuses are persons with a right to life from the moment of conception. Okay, so she doesn't even want to ask this question about when can you do an abortion, right? It's just like from the moment of conception, they're a person with a right to life. Okay, they have same moral status as me and you. She's granting that, and she's still going to try to argue that abortion can be okay, can be permissible. All right, and obviously she does this by rejecting premise 3, because that's the only thing left. This and this are granted as true, so she needs to argue that this is false so we can avoid getting this conclusion. Right? So let's see how she does that. All right, so basically she starts by addressing this assumption. The pro-lifer assumes that the fetus's right to life trumps the mother's right to her body. Okay, right to life trumps right to body. That's the principle that's being used here. Right to life trumps the right to body. And Thomson says, is that true? Let's ask if that's true, because that seems to be the principle underlying premise 3, and premise 3 is going to be the vulnerable premise that she thinks we can reject. So she comes up with this thought experiment called the violinist case, or probably has lots of names, but this case about the violinist. So she says, imagine that you wake up one day. Imagine you wake up and you discover that you've been kidnapped by the Society for Music Lovers, and the Society for Music Lovers has attached you to the kidney of a famous, sick and dying violinist. Okay, there's a really famous violinist, and the Society for Music Lovers wants to save them, and so they kidnap you. They realize that you have a perfect match, and like blood type and everything, and so they can use your body to save this person. And so they kidnap you in the middle of the night, and you don't know, and you just wake up and discover that you've been kidnapped and plugged in, basically attached to this dying violinist because their kidney's failing, right? And you have to remain plugged in in order for this person to survive. For 9 months. Okay. If you pull out the plug before then, if you unhook from the violinist before 9 months is up, that violinist will die. Okay. After 9 months, you disconnect from him, and then his kidney is fixed. It'll be working fine. So it looks like this, right? If you unplug, you'll die. So you wake up and you just find that you've been plugged into this, just threw a violin in here, this violinist who's dying, and the Society for Music Lovers has kidnapped you and hooked you up. And if you unplug, this person will die. The violinist will die. Okay. And you have to stay plugged in for 9 months. And she asks, are you obligated to stay plugged in? Is it permissible to unplug? This is a person, the violinist is a person with a right to life. Do you have to stay plugged in? And she thinks, no, you don't. Okay, so we'll get to that in just a second. So the thought experiment, and there's a little YouTube video here that kind of talks about that, if you're interested. It's supposed to draw this analogy between cases of rape and cases of, this case and a case of rape. That's supposed to be the analogy. It's supposed to be analogous to cases of rape, where you just, by no fault of your own, find yourself connected to a fetus who now needs you to survive. Okay, an unconscious, innocent person with a right to life now all of a sudden needs your body to live. Okay, no fault of your own. Just you find yourself now supporting the life of another human person with a right to life. Are you obliged? Are you obligated to stay plugged in? Now, she does 9 months, obviously, to make the analogy, but she comes back later and says, imagine it was 9 days, 9 minutes. I mean, I don't see what the difference is. So here's her judgment. She thinks you would find it outrageous that you're morally obligated to stay connected. It's like, that's crazy that you would have to stay connected for 9 months to this person who, by no fault of your own, you just find yourself woken up here. Yeah, you'd be like, I'm sorry, but you were going to die. I was used. My rights were violated and brought here. And now I'm supposed to just give up my life for 9 months. And just because some other people arranged the situation for their own benefit and for your benefit, and now I'm kind of screwed here. She says, it'd be very nice of you to do that. You could. Really what we call supererogatory people, really good people who go above and beyond what morality requires, might do it and be very nice, but it's not the same as being obligated. Okay, so she says, if you can disconnect from the violinist, so that's her judgment. She thinks the intuition here is that you're allowed to unplug from the violinist if you have to stay plugged in for 9 months. Even though, if you unplug, this person will die, and even though that's a human with a right to life. She thinks you can still unplug. And because it's analogous to these other cases, it's like, if you think you can disconnect from the violinist, who is, by stipulation, a person with a right to life, why can't you abort a fetus that's a person with a right to life? So basically she's saying, you have to make both judgments here. If you think you cannot abort a fetus, then you'd have to say you can't unplug from this situation. You're obligated to stay plugged in for 9 months. Because there's no relevant difference, right? They cannot accept both that it's permissible to disconnect the violinist rather than let him use your body for 9 months, but it's impermissible or wrong to abort a fetus who needs your body. You can't accept one and deny the other, or accept the other and deny the other one. You have to have the same response for both cases, she thinks. So we get this, what we call a trilemma, which is just, you have to pick one of these options. You can't have all of these together. You have to pick either it's impermissible to disconnect from the violinist if you want to be a pro-lifer, or you can give up your pro-life view and say sometimes it's permissible to have an abortion if it's a case like this, like a rape case, basically. Or you have to say that there's a morally relevant difference between the violinist case here and a case of abortion, in particular, like a rape case of abortion, because that's supposed to be what it's analogous to. So Thomson basically thinks that this case forces the pro-lifer to make one of these choices. Either accept her argument, which is that, sometimes it's permissible to have an abortion. That's what she thinks. And she thinks the violinist case helps us see that. Or if you want to stick with pro-life and say it's all abortions are wrong, you're going to have to say you can't disconnect from the violinist. Or if you want to keep pro-life, but you don't want to say it's wrong to disconnect, you don't want to say you're committed to connected to the violinist, then you have to find a morally relevant difference between these cases. All right, and so you might think that the difference is that the person was kidnapped, right? You're forced into the situation, like you didn't do anything, right? But Thomson's just like, yeah, fine. That's a difference between the violinist case and lots of abortion cases, but it's not different from a rape-induced pregnancy, where by no fault of your own, you were forced into that situation to where now there's a human life depending on your body for survival. Okay, and so it seems like the violinist case shows that rape-induced pregnancies are cases in which an abortion might be permissible. That's what seems to she's gotten us so far. But the pro-lifer might just say, well, fine, you can be allowed to have an abortion in rape cases, but not in other cases. Not if you voluntarily had sex or whatever and got pregnant, even if it was an accident or whatever. If you weren't like forced against your will to be in this situation where you are now responsible, or your body is responsible for keeping some other human alive, and that's the only case where it's okay. But if it's not like that, then abortion's wrong. Thomson says the right to life shouldn't depend on how you came into existence. So what you're saying, if you try to make this exception, pro-lifer is like, oh, I'll just make an exception for rape cases. And she's like, Thomson says, no, you can't make an exception. If you think it's okay in these rape cases, well then what you're saying is the right to life of the fetus in the rape case is gone. It's like overridden. It's either gone or it's overridden or something, merely because its life came about through rape. And that seems weird. It seems like the fetus who comes to existence through a case of force, rape, and a fetus at the same stage, let's say like, a week after conception or something like that, who didn't come about by force, rape, who came about by like voluntary sex. What you're saying, if you try to make an exception, is one of those fetuses' life, right to life is either present and the other one's not present, doesn't have a right, or the right gets overridden, or it's less stringent or something like that, just because it came into existence through rape. That seems very weird. So if you accept the rape case, it's going to be hard to just make an exception. Now, the pro-lifer in reply might say, look, you're missing the point, Thomson. It's not that fetuses conceived in this way are less valuable, or like don't have a right to life or something like that, or not persons. The difference is what is reasonable to ask of the mother, right? It's about this voluntariness, this consent, this knowing of what you're doing, right? Normally the mother is obligated to give up her right because, with respect to the fetus's right, but that's because there's usually this voluntariness, this knowing factor. You know the risks when you have sex and so on, but it just seems unreasonable to ask a raped woman to do the same, right? That it's not like they knew what they were doing, they consented, right, to carry her rapist child to term. It doesn't say anything about the value of the victim, right? That's what the pro-lifer might want to say, right? It doesn't say anything about the victim when a person is punished less for a crime of passion as opposed to being premeditated, right? If someone just in a blind rage kills someone and there's like no, earlier signs that they were like evil or anything, it's just like crime of passion, right? Maybe you still get in trouble, maybe you still even go to jail for a while, but you will get, sometimes anyways, you will get less of a sentence. You'll get punished less than someone who like premeditated the murder, right? But that doesn't say anything about the value of the victim. And same here. Just because the mother has more obligations in a normal case than in a rape case, that doesn't say anything about the value of the fetus. That just talks about what it's reasonable to ask of the mother. So that's what the pro-lifer might want to say. And so here's Thomson's initial reply to that. She's like, okay, that might be true. We only get rape cases, and maybe only rape cases are the situations in which, or rape-like cases, forced pregnancies without consent, all this stuff, where that's the only case where your abortion is going to be permissible. Thomson's going to say, great, fine, right? We still have to give up on premise 3. It still shows that the right to life trumps the right to body is false. It at least the sort of universal claim, the absolute claim that the right to life always trumps the right. Just put that. Always trumps the right over one's body. Well, we've still got rid of that. Even if we only have the rape cases, we still got rid of that premise. And if we get this far, the pro-lifer has to concede that sometimes the right to life does not trump the right to body, and thus abortions can sometimes be permissible. Okay, so we've gotten away from the extreme view that all abortions are wrong. Okay, now the pro-lifer can, just dig in their heels and say, basically say, no, abortions are always wrong, even in the rape cases, because I want to hold on to premise 3 and say that the right to life always trumps the right to body. Even though it seems unreasonable to ask the mother of a rape victim to carry her rapist child to term. It seems unreasonable. Maybe it is kind of unreasonable. It's at least very demanding and unfortunate and all these things, but a pro-lifer might want to say, well, look, that's just what we have to accept because of the value of life and human persons is so great that we just have to accept that. But it commits the pro-lifer to the view that abortions are permissible even when the mother's life is threatened. That's the problem. So the extreme view defense, directly killing an innocent person is always, always wrong, right? And therefore abortions can never be performed, right? That's the extreme view defense. Now, the underlying assumption here is that the defense rests on the idea that it's morally preferable to let the mother die than to directly kill the fetus. This is called the difference between killing and letting die. It's also related to this view called the doctrine of double effect, where what you intend matters. There's a couple videos on those if you're interested. But the main point here is that we have what seemed to be a rejection of the extreme view with the violinist case. The violinist case seemed to show that at least in cases of at least in cases of rape, abortion can be permitted. Okay, morally permitted. But some people might dig in their heels and say, no, even in those cases, I want to hold on to the extreme version of the pro-life view and say it's always wrong, no matter what, to kill a human in order to respect some bodily right. To kill an innocent human, it's always wrong. Right? And so, even if the life of the mother is threatened, they would have to say that you can't, it seems like they would have to say that killing the fetus is still going to be wrong. Right? And it's like, well, they might say directly killing is worse than letting the mother die. That's why you can't do the abortion, because the mother dying, you're not directly killing the mother, you're just letting her die. But if you tried to perform the abortion, even in a life-threatening pregnancy, killing the fetus is a direct killing, and that's worse. Intentionally ending the life. Whereas in the other case, you're not intentionally ending anyone's life. You're just kind of not doing anything to help. And so check these videos if you want to see that principle talked about. But here's what Thomson's response is. She's like, okay, well, let's just modify the case and see. If you like the first case, if you think the first case worked, or thought it was intuitive, then here's a different case. In this version, same setup. You're kidnapped by the Society for Music Lovers, But this time, if you remain attached to the violinist, right, you will be killed. Disconnecting from him will still kill him, but this time you will die if you remain attached. Okay, so now it's kind of like a you or him thing. And she thinks it's obviously permissible in this case, maybe even more so than in the first case, that you can disconnect to save your life. Right, and she thinks it's permissible to, basically, this is the principle. She thinks it's okay, sometimes it's okay, it's permissible, it's morally allowed to kill an innocent person in self-defense if that person is threatening your life. So sometimes it's permissible to kill an innocent threat to your life in self-defense. Okay. So in addition to the modified violinist case, which is kind of like here, if you don't unplug, you will die soon. So now I have like the Hulk to show that like if you stay connected, you're going to die. But if you disconnect, Hulk is going to die. And she's like, you're allowed to unplug. Like, there's no fault of your own. You don't owe your life to this person. So you're allowed to connect, even though if that's a person with a right to life, and that unplugging will kill them. Okay. And she's like, here's another case. Imagine you and a rapidly growing baby are stuck in a house. Okay, you're in a house, and there's a baby in there, and just by some magic, it's a thought experiment, so it's whatever. The baby, just imagine that the baby starts growing and growing and growing really, really rapidly. Kind of like an Alice in Wonderland thing. Right, just growing, growing, growing. And if you do nothing, if it's not stopped, it will burst out of the house, crushing and killing you. But the baby will live. It'll just crush out, destroy the house, and walk away. But imagine you have a ray gun, and you can disintegrate the growing baby with one shot easily. Can you save your own life? Again, imagine you just find yourself in a house. There's a baby in there. All of a sudden, the baby's growing and growing and growing and growing, and you realize it's about to smash you against the house and kill you unless you shoot it with your ray gun. Can you kill the innocent threat? The baby didn't do anything. It's just growing uncontrollably. Can you kill the innocent threat in defense of your own life? And Thomson thinks that you can. Okay. If you don't kill, you will be crushed to death. She thinks you're permitted to kill the growing person. Okay. So she thinks the person-to-person thing is irrelevant. The mother would be permitted to save herself even though it's a person. Just in these cases, this person, they're permitted to save themselves by disconnecting. If they stay connected, they're going to die. And they didn't do anything to create this situation. Right? Same here. If they don't shoot the baby with the ray gun, they're going to die. And they didn't do anything to create the situation. They're just trying to defend themselves. The baby didn't either. Hulk didn't either. But still, you can kill in self-defense if you have a lethal threat. That's what she thinks. So killing innocents in self-defense can be very complicated, right? So she starts talking about, she admits that, look, there's a lot of complicated questions here. Does it matter if they're an active threat? Like this, right? Like think of like a psychopath who you might think is not morally responsible because maybe they don't have the right sort of capacities. They have like a mental disorder. But if a psychopath like just pulled a knife out and went into like a delusional rage in an elevator and started coming at you, right? That's a active threat. You might think you're allowed, suppose you had a gun on you. Seems like you're allowed to shoot them, even if all you can do is kill them. If you have to kill them, it seems like you're allowed to, even though they're innocent in a certain sense, not morally responsible. But it also doesn't matter if there's a question, does it matter if they're an innocent bystander? So for example, imagine someone's walking down the street and a mobster comes up to you. There's someone walking on the other side of the street, and a mobster comes up to you and says, hey, puts a gun at your back or at the back of your head or something and says, here, here's a knife or gun, whatever, I don't know. Go kill that person right now, or I'm going to kill you, shoot you in the back of the head. Does the person on the other side of the street, are they allowed to kill the person who comes after them? Right? They're just an innocent bystander. They're not like a, right? A mobster says, kill the passerby or be killed. Right? So, can they kill the mobster? Can they kill the innocent bystander who's forced to do it? It's just really complicated. Does it matter if the threat caused the predicament? So the threat here in these didn't cause it. The baby didn't cause it. Hulk didn't cause it. But what if the threat is the person who caused the predicament? What if you're the person who caused the predicament? Right? How about a third party? Can a third party come in and intervene for you? So she tries to address some of these things, but she admits that it's complicated. Complicated questions can arise. But she wants to say, however all of these complicated questions turn out, it seems possible to get some case where the mother can kill the fetus in self-defense. It seems like we can get rid of some of the difficulties. Ooh, sorry, I had to take a drink. Maybe one where it's not her fault. The fetus is actively causing her death. And if that's enough, if we can get that, she says, it seems like we can get at least some cases where the baby is an active threat on the mother's life, right? And the mother didn't cause any of this on her own. Maybe it's another rape case. Then the argument is still going to be false, that it's always wrong. The argument is still going to fail, I should say, that it's always wrong to permit it, or to perform an abortion, because premise 3 is going to be false. Right? The argument's going to fail because premise 3 is not going to account for the fetus's right to life, trumping the mother's right to life in every single case. All right? If you get these cases where a lethal threat can be fatally dealt with, can be killed, right? Even though, of course, we're going to have to figure out, like, maybe not all lethal threat cases you can kill the other person. Maybe certain things have to happen, but it seems like we might get some. And again, like the rape cases, especially when they're lethal, but you might think even other kinds of lethal threat pregnancies. So she's basically saying, I still think we've made some progress here. We've shown that the argument needs to have a little bit more. Right? What's the reason the fetus's right to life continues to trump the mother's right to life? We need to have that spelled out if you want to deny all of the lethal threat cases. If you want to say abortion is always wrong. You need a reason to think that killing an innocent threat in self-defense is never permissible. You might need a reason to think that abortion cases would never meet the permissibility criteria. You need some extra stuff. So the original argument would still suffer. Okay. Now, pro-lifers can respond and say, okay, fine. Let's suppose Thomson's doing well so far. But abortions tend to involve going to a doctor and getting help with an abortion, right? So even if we grant you all these, where we've come so far, Thomson, so the pro-lifer might say, even if Thomson has shown that the mother can protect herself and, kill in self-defense, kill the threat in self-defense. So like this is about, what can you do to the baby that's threatening your life? What can you do to this other person that's threatening your life? Right? This is supposed to be analogous to the mother. And the person with the ray gun is supposed to represent like the mother, right? So the pro-lifer might say, fine, maybe the mother has the right, but the debate is about what third parties can do. Since a woman usually can't easily perform an abortion on herself. So pro-lifers have argued that the third party has to remain neutral. It's about abortion doctors, essentially. At least most of it. Right? And so Thomson says, let's modify the cases a little bit and show that also third parties can help out. Okay, so here's a modified tiny house case. imagine the same scenario, right? You're in this house, and all of a sudden the baby starts growing really fast, or the person starts growing really fast, and you notice that they're about to smash you and kill you, smash into the wall and kill you. Now, if you had a ray gun, she thinks you could shoot them. But imagine you don't have a ray gun, but someone outside, a passerby, has a ray gun, and they notice what's happening, right? And if they know all the facts, they know the house is yours, the growing baby's an intruder, let's say. Thomson thinks they can shoot the baby and save you. They can intervene. You can not only kill in self-defense, right? You can not only is it okay sometimes to kill an innocent threat in self-defense, but it's okay to kill an innocent threat sometimes. It's okay to kill an innocent threat in defense of others. Okay, and here's another case to try to show this. Imagine Jones has Smith's coat. I'll just show you. So this is Jones, this is Smith. They're out in the cold somewhere, and Jones has Smith's coat. Okay, and whoever does not have the coat is going to freeze to death. Right? Now, so suppose somebody comes by, a passerby, and they see what's going on. Jones is not giving the coat back to Smith. Smith is dying. It's Jones's coat. Sorry, hold on. Smith's coat. So Jones here has this guy's coat, and he's not giving it back. He knows this guy's going to die without his coat, and he took it from him, let's say. And then a passerby comes by, and they're able to help. Thomson thinks the passerby, if they know all the facts, are they supposed to just be like, oh, sorry, Smith, I think you're actually entitled to get your coat back and not freeze to death, even if it will kill this person. But, sorry, I can't really help you. It's like, no, they're permitted to intervene and, rectify the situation back to justice. They're allowed to restore justice to the situation. So the pro-lifer thinks, yeah, maybe you've done a good enough job showing that mothers can kill the fetus sometimes in self-defense, but not third parties. Maybe third parties can't intervene because they have to be impartial. And she says, no, the modified house case and the coat thief case, so Jones stole Smith's coat, now Smith's going to die, right? You don't have to be impartial. It's Smith's coat. It's his coat. That's why in the modified house case, the passerby person is allowed to shoot the growing person to save you because they're the intruder. It's your house, it's your property. And the analogy there is it's the woman's body. And the abortion doctor knows that. It's her body. There's a kind of intruder here that doesn't own the body. The mother owns the body. And so you do not have to remain impartial, she thinks. Right? Okay. Now, intervention is permitted, it seems, in lethal cases. That's sort of where we've come. The third party is not obligated to intervene. Okay? They're not obligated. She doesn't want to say that, but they're permitted to intervene. It's morally permissible for them to intervene on behalf of the threatened party. Well, because it's property rights. Someone has to die here. Smith or Jones is going to die. One of them is going to die. In this case, one of them is going to die. In this case, one of them is going to die. In the lethal pregnancy case, either the mother's going to die or the baby's going to die, possibly both, right? So Thomson says, what else do we do other than look to property rights? Because we have two rights to life here. One of them has got to go. They're in competition. One of them is going to die. Go to property rights. Right? It's the homeowner's home, it's Smith's coat, and it's the mother's body. The pro-lifer might say, well, I'm not really sure whether the lack of a right to use the body or the property, right? So Jones does not have a right to Smith's coat. That's kind of Thomson's point. The intruder that's growing in the house, in the tiny house case, they don't have a right to the house. And similarly, the fetus does not have a right to the mother's body. But the pro-lifer might say, just because the fetus lacks a right to use the mother's body or property, that doesn't mean that they lose their right not to be killed. That doesn't mean they give up their right to life. Okay. And they might say, well, there's differences too. Property's not the same as body, or physical property like a coat or a house, right? And then, kind of the most important one that we'll come to later, except for rape cases, right? The mother is partly responsible for the fetus using her body. Right? Imagine like Smith played a little dice rolling game with Jones for the coat. He's like, I don't want you to have my coat. You can't just have it. But I don't know. Let's roll the dice, and whoever gets the highest number gets the coat. And then Jones wins, right? It's like, well, he's at least partially, maybe fully responsible for the fact that Jones has his coat. So now it's less clear, right? And you might think in the abortion case, you kind of get something like that. Except rape cases, right? But in normal cases, the mother is at least partially responsible for the fetus using her body because she knew what she was doing, and she voluntarily, and we're assuming for the sake of argument, consensually, and let's just assume that she knows that having sex can lead to pregnancy, and so on, right? So that's a potential reply. Okay, so, but then Thomson says, look, the right to life does not entail the obligation to protect someone, right? Just because Jones does have a right to life, because remember, what the pro-lifer is saying in response to this case is that, look, sure, it's Smith's coat. Sure, it's the other person's house. Sure, it's the mother's body. But that doesn't mean that this person doesn't have a right to life. He doesn't lose his right not to be killed. And Thomson says, look, you're just trying to go back to the right to life again. Just because you have the right to life, that doesn't mean that everyone has to do everything they can to save you. It doesn't mean that. And she says, she invokes, whoops, I thought I put that in here. Oh, there it is. Maybe I put it in the wrong spot. Yeah, I did put this in the wrong spot. I'm sorry. I'm going to move this up here. I think this is supposed to go up here. Yeah. So there we go. All right. So she says, look at this case here of Henry Fonda. She says, let me show you this why it doesn't matter that you have the right to life. That's not enough to show that that everyone has to do everything that they can in order to. Sorry, we'll come back to this stuff. I just want to make sure this is all squared away. All right. Yeah. Okay. So the right to life does not entail the obligation to protect you. Right? Just because you have a right to life doesn't mean that everyone must do everything in their power to save you. So she's like, imagine Henry Fonda has a fever, Thomson says, imagine I have a fever. I have this fever and it's, possibly going to kill me. But the only thing that will save me is if Henry Fonda, who's this old actor, if he comes and puts his cool hand, as she says, his cool hand on my fevered brow. Henry Fonda was like a what's the word? Kind of like a stud of the day. He's kind of like the Brad Pitt of back in the day. And Thompson's old. I'm not even sure she's still alive, but so she's has a thing for Henry Fonda, and she's like, if I had a fever and my fever was gonna kill me, even, I can't demand that Henry Fonda come and save me by putting his cool hand on my fevered brow. Just because I have a right to life. He doesn't have an obligation to do everything in his power to save me. That's not what my right to life is. My right to life is simply a right not to be killed unjustly. Okay. And if that's true, this allows situations where a person with a right to life can be killed. Because some killings are not unjust. Right? They're not always unjust. And so just having a right to life does not mean that we can't kill you. And it doesn't mean also that everyone has to do everything in their power to save you. It just means you can't be killed unjustly. And it seems like taking this person's coat and giving it to Smith, who owns it, is not unjustly killing this person. This person has the coat unjustly in the first place. So we're not violating their right to life by not doing everything in our power to keep them alive. Okay. Now, so, premise 3 is challenged again. Given the plausibility of killing in self-defense, and the fact that a right to life is only a right to not be killed unjustly, not a right for everyone to do everything they can to save you, the right to life does not always trump the right to body. Again, that's what her conclusion is. Now, we move to another response from pro-lifers. Right? So first they say, okay, look, now what they want to say is, even if she's right about all this, since the mother, we're back to the voluntary consensual stuff. Since the mother, in most cases, voluntarily engages in the sex, knows that the sex can have a chance of producing pregnancy, and therefore she's partly, at least, responsible for the fetus's predicament. Right? She's partly responsible for the fetus being there, needing her body. Therefore, she has some duty not to kill it. Right? So she has, to put it another way, granted the fetus a right to use her body by her consensual knowing act of having sex that she knows will have a chance of leading to a baby. So she kind of grants this potential fetus her right to her body. Okay. But one thing to say is, we still have the rape cases, right? So if we get this far, then Thomson's like, look, I've still defeated the extreme view, permissibility of abortion in some cases, and that's pretty good progress. But we don't have to stop there, she thinks. She points out that, look, we would not hold people to the same standards for other risky behavior, right? So we don't say that we're handing over rights just because there's certain risky behavior. So for instance, imagine someone who leaves their window open and then a burglar comes in the window and takes their stuff or threatens their life. It's like, well, why'd you leave your window open? You know that there are burglars out there who burgle. You know, it's a possibility if you leave your window open. Maybe it's a small possibility, but you've engaged in some activity where even if it's a small chance, you know that there's some chance of a burglar coming into your backyard, coming through your open window, and taking your stuff. Therefore, you have, she's like, that principle that they're trying to use here, this principle that they're trying to use, seems to suggest that now the homeowner's granted some right to the burglar to be in their house if they leave the window open. Right? So how could that be? How could that be? A pro-lifer might say, well, that's different. The burglar's at fault, right? They have some motivation, some intention, some deliberate choice, but fetuses don't. Fetuses don't choose to go into your body. They're not even, they like to get in there. They're not even existing yet as a fetus when things start going underway, right? You have sperm and egg, but no fertilized egg yet. And so it doesn't even make any sense to say that the fetus chose to be in your body. And the burglar obviously did choose to be in your house. So there's some responsibility we can put on the burglar, but not the fetus, right? And so there's a disanalogy here. And Thomson says, so here's this kind of burglar case. It's like, can't we, the pro-lifer's like, can't we suppose that the mother has given the fetus a right to her body? And she's like, well, no. I mean, we voluntarily act in certain ways that have potential consequences all the time, but that doesn't mean we give the right to those people, like the burglar that comes in. But is the right acquired by the fetus? And she's like, well, look at the burglar case. And then the pro-lifer says, yeah, but the burglar does some work there, and fetuses don't do any deciding. And she's like, okay, well, let me give you another case. Imagine that there's these little seeds that float through the air, and if they implant into something, like carpet, then they begin to grow into a human fetus. So call them people seeds. There's these people seeds. Just imagine that we lived in a world where people seeds floated around outside. Right? And if you leave your window open and a people seed comes in and implants into your carpet or a rug or the curtains or something, then it will start to grow into a little pod. It will grow into a pod, and a fetus will start developing inside. Just imagine. right? Now, imagine a homeowner knows this, right? But it seems like they're still permitted to open their window. Or maybe use protective screens, right? And if they can do that and use some protective screen that's pretty good at keeping these people seeds out, it seems like they haven't granted the people seed, the little fetus that's going to start growing, they haven't granted them a right to their house. I mean, they're actively taking steps to keep it out. Reasonable steps, right? So she's not assuming the risk of having to care and grow the fetus and all that if it implants. She's trying to keep it out with the screens. And it's not even clear that you need to be putting screens up in order for this to work, but we'll just say that is, she would be permitted to remove the people seed. Right. And if the seed was, if the screen was defective, especially, because then it's really not her fault. Right? Same with the pro-lifer case. It's like, if you open your window and a burglar gets in, you haven't given the burglar the right to your house just because you know it's possible for burglars to come in. But imagine you put bars up and the bars were defective. It's like, even more so, you didn't grant them a right. I mean, you were actively trying to keep them out. So, of course, you're not granting them a right to your house. Same with the people seeds case. And, of course, I don't know if you can kind of tell this by now, but this is supposed to be analogous to using condoms, basically, or other kinds of protection. What's it called? Contraceptives. That is like saying, well, look, of course, I know there's a chance of a person ending up coming into existence from this activity, but that doesn't mean I'm not allowed to engage in the activity without assuming all these responsibilities of taking care of a child, right? As long as I take reasonable steps, use protection, whatever else, I'm just not clear why I have assumed the risk of having to care for this thing. Okay, so the analogy here is to voluntary sex and defective contraception. That's the analogy. Imagine the seed floats into the house and then accidentally is inhaled by the homeowner and implants into their body. It's like Thomson just says, I just don't understand why this person has given over their right to their body in their house. It's like, you just have to keep your windows closed all the time? Like, there's ways to like reduce the risk of this happening. So why can't I enjoy the outside air and so on if I'm taking these steps to reduce the risk of an implantation? Right. So look, risk does not entail responsibility. Taking a risk with foreseen consequences does not make you responsible for all those consequences that follow. Okay. If you take reasonable precautions, that's all you really need to do. Right. It certainly does not follow that just any consent, right? Sorry, it certainly does not follow that you have consented. That's what I meant to say. It certainly doesn't follow if you engage in some risky action where you know possible consequences, possible negative consequences might come about. You haven't assumed the risk of all those consequences, and you certainly have not consented to those consequences. You've consented to the action, and you've said, okay, I know certain risks are here, but it's not that you consent to having those things happen. At least in a sense of transferring your rights to those things. I mean, you're actively taking steps to try to avoid it. And now the pro-lifer at this point might say, well, the absence of consent, right? The absence of consent for the consequences, or the absence of responsibility for the consequences, is different from the presence of a right or permission to terminate the life. Okay, so just because you don't consent to the baby being formed in your body and using your body, so the pro-lifer's like, okay, look, fine, just knowingly engaging in this activity, knowing the risk voluntarily, that doesn't mean you're fully responsible, but they'll say like, yeah, but you still don't have a right to kill it. Just because you're not fully responsible for it doesn't mean you have the right to kill it. Because that's distinct from the presence of a right or permission to terminate its life. Not having consented to the fetus being there is different from having a right to kill it. So they want to say Thomson's only shown that, at best, has only shown that the mother, in these cases where she's used protection and taken reasonable steps to avoid having a baby, has not, okay, fine, maybe that means that they haven't actually consented to the baby using their body, hasn't given the fetus a right to their body. But that doesn't mean they now have a right to kill the fetus. That's what she wants to say. Or that's what the pro-lifers want to say. But Thomson says, well, look, voluntariness, voluntarily engaging in this activity that you know, and knowledge, that you know might produce this risk, that's not enough. That's not enough to take away your right to your body. That's not enough to say that you are now obligated to give your body over to this human for 9 months. Okay, she's shown, she thinks, that at least the fetus is not, doesn't have a claim on the mother's body, right? The fetus isn't owed the mother's body just because the mother voluntarily and knowingly engaged in an activity that possibly produces babies. So we need to know how much burden there is on the mother. Okay, how much burden is there to carry the fetus to term? Right? That might be what decides the factor. How much burden there is, right? That's a story we might ask. And does that affect whether the fetus can be killed or whether the fetus has a right to the body? But the fetus's right to life does not always trump the right to the body. It just kind of, we don't have that established still. Because what the pro-lifer was trying to say, in Thomson's view anyways, is that the fetus is given the right to the body by the mother acting voluntarily and knowingly when she has sex. And Thomson says that's not enough to show that the fetus has a right to the body. Just because it was done voluntarily and knowingly, knowing the risks, that's not enough to show that the fetus has a right to the body. Okay, so this, the fetus's right to life always trumps the right to the body, that's still up in the air. Okay. All right, and then she says at the end of this section, causal responsibility is not enough, for sure. So she's like, well, what if they say, well, you caused it? Like you're the literal cause of the fetus coming into existence, which is kind of undeniable. And so Thomson says, well, that doesn't matter. You don't have some special responsibility even though your action like literally caused it to come into existence. Right? You need something to justify the assumption of a duty here. The assumption that you owe the fetus your body. You need something more than that. More than just being the cause. Right? So her thought experiments, they're trying to show the voluntariness, right? You consented, it's not rape. And then awareness, some knowledge of the risks, of the consequences. That doesn't show that you have a right, that the fetus has a right, that you now have a duty to give your body to the fetus. That's not enough, right? Causal responsibility is not going to be enough. So there needs to be something extra, and voluntariness and knowledge are not enough. Okay. Now, Thomson thinks that some cases of, she wants to say like so far she thinks she's gotten us a lot of cases of permissible abortion. But she says, look, it can still be indecent to have abortion sometimes. She wants to kind of now come the other way and say not all abortions are okay. Hold on now. She says, look, some cases of abortion, like a late abortion so that you can travel, right? If a mother's like, 9 months pregnant, she's almost at her due date, and then gets an invitation to go to a free vacation, in like a month or two. And she's like, wow, well, I could just have an abortion, kind of recover and heal up a little bit, and then go on this nice free vacation for 2 weeks to, I don't know, Jamaica, wherever. That seems really indecent. Right? So, but she wants to say, it's not clear that it's wrong. It's just really like unvirtuous, indecent, right? So she says some cases of abortion are morally indecent, but oops. And she wants to say shouldn't be performed. It shouldn't be performed. She thinks that would be bad. It'd be a bad decision. You'd be kind of a bad person if you did that in a certain sense. But she wants to emphasize the mother is still not violating anyone's rights. That's what she thinks. Even in this case, late abortion so you can travel. And the reason is because all the stuff that comes before it. Voluntariness, knowledge, all these things, causal responsibility. They're not enough, she thinks, to show that the fetus has a right to the body, that you've granted the fetus a right to the body. Now, a pro-lifer, I don't know if this is on here, the pro-lifer might respond and say, well, in these certain cases, now you don't just have to consider how the fetus came about. You now have 9 months of the mother sort of at least implicitly consenting to the fetus using its body. With all intents and purposes, for all intents and purposes, the mother looks like they're going to bring it to term and everything. So she says, it would be indecent, but maybe not violating anyone's rights. But the pro-lifer might say, I don't know, after 9 months of letting it use your body, haven't you kind of consented to it using your body at that point? So there's a question there as well. Now, this distinction, we're going to talk about this distinction a little bit more. An act can be morally indecent but not unjust. So look, imagine the boy who, two boys that have chocolate, right? Or two brothers, and one has chocolate and he's given it to him. It's his chocolate. And then he has a brother who's like, oh, can I have some chocolate? Imagine he doesn't share the chocolate, right? He doesn't share the chocolate. Well, it's his chocolate. And the parents gave it to him, right? And let's say the other child has some chocolate and he already ate his, or maybe he gave his away and he's trying to be nice, let's say. It doesn't matter. The point is, one kid owns something, the chocolate, the other one wants it, and he doesn't give it to him. And what she's saying is, that might be indecent. Maybe it's more chocolate than the boy can even eat. That would be indecent, but it's not unjust. He hasn't violated the other kid's right. The other kid doesn't have a right to his chocolate. It's not his, right? And the same thing with Henry Fonda. When he doesn't cross the room to put his cool hand on her fevered brow to give his magic healing touch, he's done something indecent, and he probably should, she would say, do that. But he hasn't violated anyone's rights because Thomson does not have a right for him to come do that. She does not have a claim on his body, right? They're not being virtuous, but they don't commit a rights violation. They don't commit an injustice. Right? This is from another class I have, but if you're interested, I have this paper called Feeding the Hungry, where, oh gosh, I'm forgetting his first name. Narvison's first name. It's like Jans or something. It's a foreign name. Anyways, I have this paper where he argues that this is wrong, that you do have a right to help other people when in need, to like save their life and so on. So anyways, if you're interested, I can send you that as well. All right, so given this distinction between indecency and injustice, Thomson says it's not morally wrong in the right sense, in the injustice sense, to perform lots and lots of abortions, but some of them might be indecent, right? It still might be true that the mother ought not to perform the abortion, right? Maybe it's not that burdensome. Maybe she just wants to abort because she wants to travel, doesn't have a very good reason, and so on. So Thomson says, look, forcing women to submit to 9 months to an unwanted pregnancy is making them far more than minimally decent. Okay, if they're forced to submit to 9 months of unwanted pregnancy, they're not just being minimally decent. So it's not like a minimum requirement or something. It's like, no, they don't owe that. They don't owe it. Unless you add a bunch of extra details here, they don't owe that. A good Samaritan is someone who does a charitable deed, but is not demanded by justice. Right, so if you see an old lady who's walking slowly across the street with some groceries, and maybe you even see someone ask her for help, and she says no. She's like, no, I'm okay. Well, it seems like she's not really struggling. It doesn't seem like you're obligated to go help her. You have pretty good evidence that she doesn't even need or want help, right? But it would be nice to do so, right? You do be a charitable thing to do that, but it's not demanded by justice, right? So, Thomson also thinks that the pro-lifer may be in bad faith if they don't favor the Good Samaritan laws, other than anti-abortion ones. So, if the pro-lifer thinks, well, the mother should still go through with the pregnancy even if it's not wanted, because that would be the decent thing to do. They need to do this kind of Good Samaritan thing, right? It's like, well, what about all these other Good Samaritan laws that the pro-lifers are not arguing for? If abortion violates the fetus's rights, then it seems like not helping out strangers in trouble would violate their rights. Right? If you see someone being mugged and you don't help, why aren't you violating their rights? But you might think, well, it does seem like you should, but does everyone with a right to life whose life is threatened have a claim against you? Do they have a right against you to help them? And to do whatever is in your power to help them? Right? So, that's unclear. And that's what Thomson wants to say. All right, so we'll come to the end. So let's kind of just wrap summary where we've come. We started by saying, is personhood enough? She's like, I'll grant you personhood. I'll grant that the fetus is a person. I'll grant that they have a right to life. But is that enough to say that abortions are wrong? And she says no, because look, the violinist case. We can see it's okay to unplug, even though if unplugging will kill this other person. And you might get people that dig in their heels and say, no, you can't unplug. It's always wrong. And she's like, okay, well, now imagine it'll kill you, right? Imagine the tiny house case, or imagine the violinist case again, where it'll kill you. Fatal pregnancy. You're allowed to kill in self-defense of your life, even if the threat is innocent. And then the pro-lifer might say, okay, fine, even if I believe you, abortion doctors can't help, because only the mother has a right to defend her own life lethally. And she says, no, you can kill in defense of others too. Look at the Smith's coat case. You shouldn't just be impartial. You should help out Smith. It's an injustice that Jones has Smith's coat and Smith's going to die because of it. And then you add the passerby to the tiny house case. Not only can you shoot the growing baby with the ray gun, but the passerby can as well, especially if they know it's your house. Late stage abortion, or is that late stage? No. Oh, life-sustaining abortion. Right. So if the abortion is what will save the mother's life, right, that's what that's supposed to be analogous to, then the doctor can help save the mother's life because it's her body. And the response there from the pro-lifer might be, well, wait, but what about the right to life? Even if even if the baby is threatening the mother's life, we have two lives here, two rights to life. Why should we kill the baby as opposed to letting the mother die? And remember the doctrine of double effect stuff that you can watch those videos on that talks about that. But she says, well, look, the point here is it's not just the right to life by itself is not going to do much work, because a right to life is a right not to be killed unjustly. It's not a right for everyone to do everything they can to save you, right? And that's the Fonda case. A right to life does not entail claims on my body. And that's the difference in these cases. That's why you can step in, because it's the mother's body, it's the person's house, it's Smith's coat. That's why we can step in. Of course, Jones has a right to life, but they both have a right to life. So now we need to move something else. We need to move to property. What's the justice here? There's an injustice that Jones has the coat. There's an injustice that the mother's body is being used, and that use of her body is threatening her life. It's her body. And they say, oh, okay. But the fetus acquires a right to the body because the mother did it voluntarily and knowingly. She knows the risks. And then Thomson says, well, just because we do things knowingly and have, just because we do things knowingly and have these, the knowledge of these things, doesn't mean that, sorry, my dog just came into the room. I need to regroup here. We have the Fonda case. The right to life doesn't entail a claim on your body. And then the pro-lifers say, okay, yeah, but the fetus acquires a right to the body because the mother does it knowingly and voluntarily. And she says, well, just because we do things knowing that there's this risk of these consequences and there's this voluntariness into it, that doesn't mean we accept all the risks. That doesn't mean we've granted the burglar a right to our house. That doesn't mean we've granted the people seeds a right to grow, right? And so the knowingness, the knowledge, the voluntariness, that's not going to be enough to say that the mother has granted a right to the fetus's life. Granted a fetus a right to her body. Okay, so knowledge and voluntariness are not enough to justify the fact that the fetus has a right to the body. That's not enough. Okay, so now Thomson addresses two objections at the end. One is that, hey, this is too weak. From objections from pro-choicers, they're like, this is too weak. We want abortion to always be permissible. And she says, well, that's really counterintuitive. Some cases should be impermissible, like the late stage travel thing. If you wanted to have an abortion at like 9 months just because you wanted to travel, that seems bad. And like you ought not to do that, and it's very indecent. Even in the injustice sense, you might have impermissible cases. So say the mother voluntarily gets pregnant and wants to go on the trip, right? You might even have some injustice there because it might be that after 9 months, as I mentioned earlier, maybe at that point the mom has granted the fetus a right to her body. So, but in any case, she does not want it to be absolute. Some abortions are going to be wrong. Now, she also wants to say that pro-choicers might think that the mother should have a right to secure the death of the fetus if it survives the abortion. So imagine you unplug from the violinist, but the violinist survives miraculously. Well, you can't now turn to the violinist and kill it, right? You've already detached. You've done the thing that you wanted to do. You've saved yourself, or you've removed the other individual from using your body. But that doesn't mean that if the thing that was using your body, the violinist or the fetus, if they survive the separation from your body, you can't just reach over and kill it now. That's not. She thinks she doesn't want to get that result. She thinks she doesn't want it to be absolute, and she doesn't want it to secure the permissibility of killing the fetus even if it survives the abortion. So she doesn't want those things. All right, so now a pro-lifer has a couple choices, right? They can find a morally relevant difference between Thomson's cases and the cases of abortion. Right? Ones that, either ones that she doesn't address because she thinks that she's addressed all the potential differences, which is probably not true, but you can say that despite her replies, the differences do remain. So either you can find a difference that she doesn't address, or you can say that, well, despite her replies, some differences do remain. Or you can bite the bullet and say that you do have to remain connected to the violinist. You can't shoot the growing baby if it's in your house about to kill you. You can't intervene and give Smith his coat back from Jones, even though Jones stole it from him and now Smith's going to die. You'd have to accept what she thinks are really counterintuitive judgments about the cases. All right, that's it for Thomson. Thanks.